Welcome, listeners, to today's episode of the Black Business Roundtable. I am your host, Doug Blacksher, broadcasting to you live from the city of Diversity, Oakland, California. The holidays are upon us, and the crime in Oakland and other San Francisco Bay Area city and across the nation is reaching all-time highs. On the news, we are seeing stories of people locally in the Bay Area leaving their empty vehicle trunks of their cars open or windows down to hopefully avoid being broken into, leaving owners with expensive damage. This is outrageous, as this also can lead to a multitude of issues such as stolen personal info in the car glove compartment, and worse yet, someone knowing your license number and using your vehicle without your knowledge to then carry their small illegal or ill-gotten items in your home to your home. The possibility of criminal following you home to only break into uh, get the planet items could open you up to an unwilling participant transporting illicit items. What if you were perhaps pulled over for a traffic violation and something were you were unaware of that was illegal was in your vehicle?
Mm.
People, close your car trunk, close your windows, and secure your car, or shop perhaps with friends and share the cost of a ride share. To that end, of the day when patrons and businesses are robbed, it hurts the entire community and all share in the suffering. We need to empower our community and reduce crime, build back better together. A special thanks to Magnolia Engineering and Construction for the continued support, and we congratulate, and continuously congratulate Tammy Willis on her continued industry accomplishment. Selected by Board of Directors of BART for an appointment to BART Audit Committee. Visit Tammy Willis and Magnolia Engineering Construction at Magnolia Engineering and Construction. And let me just tell you this, folks. I had an opportunity to participate on the audit committee, and I won't say participate on, uh, view Tammy Willis, and the girl is dynamite. Today's show highlights. Tonight, we will discuss crime in our communities and how we can reduce crime and build back our communities better together. We will discuss the role of the Community Policing Advisory Board here in the city of Oakland, California. And the reason why we chose this topic is because people will not shop anywhere if they expect to come out and find their car damaged, windows broken out, items stolen, or car not even there. So this is a very important episode to not here in Oakland, in the Bay Area, or in California, but across the United States, specifically in urban cities. Our guests today including myself, will share our experience sitting on the Community Policing Advisory Board. I encourage our audience as community members nationwide concerned about crime to seek out working with such advisory boards within their own communities. You might find you may need to be the catalyst to get a board started if you find there are none available in your community. Now, I'm going to do a brief sidebar. I have the opportunity to serve to two of our special guests. One is the chairperson, and the other is a active member in her community, in her neighborhood, and in this city. And she's not from Oakland. She's from New York, New York. Our guests today include weekly check-in with our very own Dr. Ashley Coleman, Department Chair, Assistant Professor of Psychology at University of the West. Welcome, Dr. Ashley.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Happy to be back for Therapeutic Thursdays.
Well, let me just be clear, audience. Today is extremely important because I've asked Dr. Ashley to talk to our audience, and specifically the African American male and females, because we don't reach out for the psychological help that's needed in these holiday season times in which we're sitting at home, starting to drink more, do drugs, and really, uh, we'll just say, troll up. And that could be more dangerous than a broken leg or a bad cavity needing a good dentist. Our next guest, a sister who has the passion and the fire to not only run off the thugs and punks and crooks in her neighborhood, but to shake up City Hall. Carol Wyatt is a representative of the Community Policing Advisory Board for District 3, serving as the chair of Neighborhood Crime Prevention Council for Police Beat 7X in the city of Oakland for over 10 years. During her service as chair, she and several neighbors worked to see crime and reduction by more than 50% by engaging neighbors and businesses in the area. She previously served on the Public Ethics Commission through 2014 through 2017, and she serves as an at-large board member of West Oakland's Neighbors, and that's acronym is WON, WON, West Oakland Neighbors. Carol Wyatt is the Director of Talent, Diversity, and Professional Services for Carol H. Williams Advertising, the largest minority and female woman-owned creative communication company. And I'd like to say this, Carol Wyatt, I did some research on Carol H. Williams Advertising, and I got to point out this, audience. This woman has done work for our Department of Defense, for other government entities, but I find it strikingly strange that the city of Oakland has never retained her services. And I'm going to ask Carol Wyatt, why is that and how we can change that in this new year. Our second guest, and he is now, we're going to call him a friend of the show, Mr. Attorney Creighton Davis Esquire. Returning guest Creighton Davis graduated with honors from Boston College, majoring in political science with a double minor in international studies and Middle Eastern studies. He also attended New York University of Law. He is the chair of Oakland's Community Policing Advisory Board and also sits on the board of ARUM Prep, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, a middle school in East Oakland and the Center of Youth Development through Law. Our warrior or social justice, Janani Ramachandran Esquire, will return after a year, after the new year. She continues to be our social justice warrior, fighting for Oakland one day at a time. Catch up with Janani anytime at Central Legal de la Raza website, www.centrallegal.org, or via her website at janani4ca.com. That's janani4ca.com, and Instagram at Janani4California. Now, for the national political highlight. Val Deming, my sister, is running for the 2022, excuse me, 2022 Senate seat. If you would like to stay tuned or stay up to date on Team Deming, text the word join to 77076. That is join to 77076. She is a Florida ready, willing, and able. The former Orlando police chief is seeking to unseat Republican Little Marco Rubio from Florida as he continues to divide Floridians by continuing the big 2020 election steal lie. Little Marco, pack your little bags and put your little tennis shoes on, and I'm sure you go down to the kids' mart to pick those tennis shoes up and scurry on up out of there, because our sister Val Demings is coming, and she's going to clean up the mess that you continuously make down there in Florida. Be sure to register to vote. Let's flip this seat and let Val Deming, former police chief, drain the Florida swamp and Little Marco Rubio. Val Deming for 2022 Senate. Her tagline is never die. Never tire. Never tire. Election date, November 8th, 2022. Visit Val Demings at valdemings.com or Instagram at Val Deming. And just a sidebar, for those of you who do not exercise your constitutional right, you'll be wanting to go to see a concert. You'll want to go to shopping. You'll want to go to Disneyland. But you enjoy these things because we all vote. You enjoy the things that will make your streets clean in your neighborhoods. You enjoy clean parks, and you enjoy the representation of our local elected official. I humbly urge you, no, I beg you, start voting, because Oakland is having a redistricting plan going on, and they're excluding the areas that don't vote and putting them into areas that will not have the power in this city of Oakland to establish better parks, cleaner streets, better police services, and the most important, if it doesn't do anything else, audience, it's about economics. If you are in a crime-ridden area, the property value of your home will go down. And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this emphatically. When Black people move out of Black communities and white people move in those communities, the prices of the homes double, and in some cases triple. And that is because you do not vote. So if you do not vote, do not complain. Thank you for allowing me to rant and rage. Okay. And now, for the news of the day, Dr. Ashley, my sister, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And again, this news of the day is courtesy of the Equal Justice Initiative. So on this day, December 16th, 1945, unfortunately, a Black family was killed after refusing to leave a white neighborhood in California. So this occurred in the city of Fontana, home of the Short family. And their home erupted in flames, killing Helen Short and her two children, Barry, who's age 9 at the time, and Carol Ann, age 7. Husband and father, O'Day, age Short, survived the explosion but stayed in critical condition at a nearby hospital for several weeks until he also succumbed to his injuries. Until their deaths, the Shorts were the first and only Black family living in their neighborhood. And initially organized as a collection of chicken farms and citrus groves in the early 20th century, by the early 1940s, the opening of a wartime steel mill had transformed the small San Bernardino County town of Fontana into an industrial center. And as the community grew and became more diverse, strict segregation lines emerged. And of course, this impacted Black families that were moving out of the overcrowded Los Angeles area, and they were relegated to living in the rocky plains of North Fontana and were working in the dirtiest departments of the mill. Additionally, Fontana had a very large Ku Klux Klan following, and activity surged throughout Southern California during this time period, with white supremacists poised to terrorize Black and Chicano veterans of World War II, returning with ideas of racial equality. And so when we think about, again, how this story of this first pioneering Black family moving to this area, they originally were from Mississippi. So we see this move west, again, seeking a better life. They were met, unfortunately, with racial trauma that inevitably led to the loss of life. And this is a story that I hadn't heard. I want to encourage all of our listeners to go to calendar.eji.org in order to see the pictures of the families as well. Doug, I'm doing my favorite pose since I'm back.
Girl, I was last week. I went a whole 28 minutes being unheard. I don't know if that boosted the rating or what, but I missed you. Thank you.
I miss you too. No problem.
And once again, Dr. Ashley, please give our audience our sponsor and our respect to our founder. Take it away, Dr. Ashley.
Sure, absolutely. So I want to acknowledge Mr. Donnie Glover of BlackUSA.news, and be sure to tune in to Chapin Friends on Mondays, Party Marty Let's Talk on Tuesdays. Want to highlight Magnolia Engineering and Construction, whose vision is to further the presence of Black women in the construction and engineering industry through key partnerships and building contracts in the municipal, government, and transportation sectors. Want to invite our listeners, if you're interested in joining our advertising family, please send your company name, address, website, and other contact information to our email address, bbrt2021@hotmail.com. Additionally, we want to say a special thank you to the cast of Lerner and Lowe's Camelot, who also our past guests and notable music performer, Dr. Philip Harris, has his last performance on December 19th. He is the music director and also cast as author in Lerner and Lowe's Camelot. And the venue is the Barn Theater, the Marin Art and Garden Center in Ross, California. If you're interested, please contact that website to find out also the COVID protocols. And for more information on Dr. Philip Harris, please visit www.philiplnharris.com.
I'm on it, Dr. Ashley. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And once again, those of you who were able to watch that show with Dr. Philip Harris, this is an amazing brother. I've been to some of his operas and his singing shows, and I've heard about the Carnegie Hall. This brother brings a unique perspective into a field of music that very few Black people are engaged in. So I humbly ask that you check Dr. Philip Harris out in his new position, in his new play, and listen to this brother blow. I think you will find it very encouraging, and you will learn a lot. Also, briefly, the Oakland African American Chamber of Commerce. The interview that we did finally came out, and if you get a chance, pull it up on Cron 4 TV. That's KRON 4 TV. Many businesses who are members of this chamber have small clip outlining the services of their businesses. And moving into next year, the Black Business Roundtable is going to be reaching out to members of the Oakland African American Chamber of Commerce and setting up special rates for them to advertise their services and goods. Now, let me be clear, audience. When you come to Oakland, whether you're from New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Little Rock, Arkansas, New Orleans, LA, you will know where to go, and we will be advertising them on this show. So we look forward to working with the members of the Oakland African American Chamber of Commerce. Now let's get it fired up, Joe. Let's get it fired up. Let's welcome to the show for the first time, Carol Wyatt. She is a member of the Community Policing Advisory Board and Director of Talent, Diversity, and Professional Services with Carol H. Williams Advertising. And the reason why I wanted to keep that name ringing in your ear, because I've been meeting with council people and some of the administrative executive board for the city of Oakland, pushing them. And I'm telling you, pushing them to include Black businesses in that $450 million pot of contractual services that is given out every year, which 86 cents of every dollar goes to white male-owned businesses. So, Dr. Ashley, please introduce this dynamic sister who I work on the Community Police and Advisory Board. And when I get in trouble, I call Carol. I don't call the police. Take it away, Dr. Ashley. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Carol Wyatt's community service is a part of her daily life, whether she's mentoring teens and young people to ignite and inspire their interests, dreams, and goals related to her career work, or serving the community as a change agent for a better and inclusive community. Carol's passion plan focuses on community, diversity, inclusion, equity, and includes engaging neighbors and community care partners and identifying creative opportunities that bridge the community, sparks difficult discussions, and advocates action in common goals. Want to welcome Ms. Carol Wyatt to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ashley. Thank you, Art. That was a very, humbling introduction.
Carol, let me just say this.
Yes.
I'm so happy to have you on the show. Audience, Carol and I work on the Community Police and Advisory Board for the last 9 months.
Yeah.
And Carol has been very instrumental with me more of an effective member on the Community Policing Advisory Board. So, Carol, thank you and welcome to the show.
No, thank you. I really appreciate you guys doing this. It really is wonderful to be invited to participate in meaningful discussion, especially as it centers around Black business, Black communities, and Black people. It's really important we finally get some light. So thank you so much for having me on today.
Well, also, too, let me just say this, Carol, my friend and my comrade. When we talked and you said, and I asked you, have you ever watched the show? And you said, of course I watch your show. Girl, you could have just pushed me right on up over the wall without even effort. I'm glad to know that we're reaching intelligent, articulate people such as yourself. And this show is designed to inform and to empower our people in economics and economic development and growth. Thank you. And once again, we welcome you to the show. Let's start off right away with, can you give our audience a brief history of your ties in the Bay Area? Where are you originally from? Are you homegrown from the Bay Area, or were you blessed enough you moved here to become a part of our diverse community? Carol, please take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to answer the second part of the question before I answer the first part of the question, because it's very important for people to know. My accent tells you a hint that I'm probably from back east, which is true. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, born and raised, bred there. Came up from people who were originally from the South. My mom was from South Carolina. My father was from what we call North Florida, but really that's part of the South. For those that don't understand that Miami isn't Florida. It's in Florida, but it's not representative of what we were taught. And I was very blessed to actually be handpicked from my prior employer to be relocated to San Francisco when they opened up a San Francisco office in the late 1990s. I, of course, like most people, was looking around, and other than Bayview, Hunters Point, and a few other areas where there was basically segregated people, which is similar to where I'm from, because New York has neighborhoods too that is basically diverse. People, first, second generation, kind of migrate to where their people are. So it's not so much discriminatory as it is comfort, right? It's just like tribal in that sense. I felt very blessed to be able to come to California. And to my surprise, my shero in advertising, which is the industry I worked in for the last over 30 years, started her office in Oakland. And I was very surprised that Carol H. Williams, who's from Chicago, she's a South Side of Chicago girl. She started her agency in California. She was married to a prominent doctor here in the Bay Area, Dr. Tipkins Hood. He's passed away now. But I was very pleased to have to basically find that out and trip over it, not expecting that, here I am 19 years later. We've been working together ever since. So I feel very blessed to have been able to pick up roots from New York, put them down here in Oakland. And there was so much of a synergy between the Bay Area and parts of New York. I know you guys have heard that before, and people say, well, Oakland is just like Brooklyn. And I always go, no, Oakland is Oakland. Oakland has its own swag. Do not try to don't co-op. Own your swag. Oakland has plenty of it. It had a lot more swag before Brooklyn became swag. So we have to look at that benefit of such a beautiful, vibrant Black city. Because even when I talked to my boss, I remember she told me when she came out here from Chicago, she said, Oakland had it going on, and I guess her husband at the time, I think he was one of those guys that was the eligible bachelor in Jet magazine. Y'all remember that when they used to put the eligible bachelor in there? I said, ooh, girl, they must have came for you coming from Chicago, snatching up one of their best, the brightest, But, it's been a really wonderful experience being out here now since the late 90s.
Doug, you know what I'm gonna say.
Well, ladies, I gotta tell you, the last couple of days I've been under the weather, and I'm very fortunate to have somebody who's helping me recuperate. So I'm a little lightheaded. Right. So I may a little more than I normally do. So work with me, ladies. And let me be clear, audience. These two Black women, as 99.999999% of our Black women, not only in this country, in this world, has held up the Black family, the Black community. So I am truly honored every time I look on the screen and I see myself surrounded by not only intelligence, but beauty, to know that we're going to win this war on economic development and economic growth. Because the studies have shown that Black women in America are the #1 business to invest in because they show the most return on the money.
Yep.
How did you, Carol, come to reside in the melting pot known as California? And I know you just answered. Be a little more detailed, because we want to know how Oakland, California was fortunate enough to have
Yeah. Well, fortunately for me, I didn't get homesick right away. When I moved out here in the late 90s, the agency I worked for it was just starting up a San Francisco office. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget my boss at the time, because I was living in San Francisco, south of Market. And then when I met and started dating a young man here in Oakland, I ended up moving to a Rockbridge area. Now, fun fact, his parents were one of the first Black families to buy a house in Rockbridge, and they still have it. Mm-hmm. And his father has passed away, but his father was from Mississippi. And I remember us having a conversation about that. He was like, if you buy real estate in California, don't ever sell it. Mm-hmm. I've heard that from several people several times. And fortunately, I know a lot of African Americans that have real estate here. And it's really, really important that we put down roots and keep it, because that's exactly how, communities like Harlem, mm-hmm. and the Tulsa district, the Black Wall Street, those are how our communities get started. I was really fortunate enough, though, to be able to buy a Victorian here in West Oakland at the time that wasn't gentrification. Because when I was looking for a piece of real estate, it was going on around me, which I didn't see it actually yet, but I saw it kind of. And I had friends saying to me, well, why don't you move out to Pittsburgh? Or why don't you move? I said, girl, I'm a Brooklyn girl. We live in the city. Mm-hmm. And my father used to say, always move into the city. They have infrastructure. White people will never work where there ain't no infrastructure. And I used to sit back and look at him and say, what is he talking about? Now I understand. Now I understand what he's talking about. But his point was, if you could walk to work and get to industry that really fulfills your life, then you live there. And that's why I think a lot of the African-American communities in cities are that way. Because most of us don't drive cars. In New York, they don't, I have a driver's license, but you don't have to drive in New York City. You can take public transit, and it really is reliable to the point that you almost depend on it more than you depend on driving, not getting stuck in traffic. And so I thought it was really a magnificent opportunity for me, not just to work for my shero, Carol Williams, but to own a piece of real estate here in Oakland, California. I was like, you know what? That's a dream come true. You can't afford anything in New York City. Even if you can afford something in New York, it's shifted so badly. And I know that Oakland's on its way in some ways. That's why I think a lot of people like to do that comparison. But that's why economic development and growth and basically investment and reinvestment in African-American businesses and communities is so important, because we need to own where we live. Now, let me be clear. I'm not sitting back saying to get into a bunch of debt or do certain things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. Even if you can go down south and buy a piece of property that you can afford and you don't owe the bank half your family, it's important that we recognize the value of family and investment. It's extremely important. And I was able to see both of those things here in Oakland.
Carol, I want to just say before Dr. Ashley and Dr. Ashley, I got to ask this, and I need our audience to pay close attention. You said gentrification. Yeah. Can you explain to our audience what exactly does that mean, and use as much time as you need to articulate it, because I've heard you very much articulate and define gentrification. Thank you.
Well, gentrification means a lot of things to a lot of people, but when you basically remove something that was always there and replace it with something that wasn't, and then you reorganize it completely like the thing that wasn't there before, to me, that's gentrification. Mm-hmm. I found myself getting into arguments with my own people about renewal versus gentrification. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are afraid for investment to come into communities, and they should be. I'm not saying that they should just automatically say, oh, great, we get a new grocery store, welcome to the neighborhood. No, we have to be shareholders in our own community and hold people accountable to how they show up in our community. If you show up and you see the bulldozers, that in theory always has been very nerve-wracking for African Americans, because especially we've been here, we've set up roots, we've even put up with the stuff they won't give us. So we make amends, we make do. Then finally some infrastructure comes in, and all of a sudden we're being pushed out. So being smart about how we put tentacles in our community, be it housing, be it art, be it business, be it even entertainment. I come from jazz people. As you guys can see over my shoulder here, I got a picture of Billie Holiday, and the other side of me, I got a picture of Miles Davis. My father knew these people. And the reason why he knew them is because we studied music as children, and he studied music and went into the military and was in the band. And some of the way that Black people managed to get through and get up was through their talent and their ability to engage. I remember my father, I'll never forget this. And, you know, I'll take a little selfish plunge, because my brother right now has a jazz CD, and that's number 7. It's been on the Jazz Week chart since mid-September. And this gets him around the world. He travels around the world with young Black musicians, and it's Black jazz. We are very clear there's a difference. And I remember my father said, you will always be able to access rooms with kings and presidents if you learn how to play music as a Black person. And I thought that was the most fascinating thing in the world that he said that. But of course, now if we look at art and the arts, performing arts, you'll see people like Misty Copeland, who's the ballerina. She performs in front of the Obamas. And these are people that they're just trained and do what they do well. And they can come in and change the world just by their craft and their presence. So it's really important. Yeah, it's really important. Like, you know, we don't celebrate our gifts like we should as African Americans. And we really need to recognize and own what it is that makes us different and special from every other unique, ethnicity and people's backgrounds.
I agree. And I get to say, is Brooklyn in the house? Without a doubt. There's so many similarities to Oakland and Brooklyn. And it's here when I think about you arriving in Oakland in the 90s, you know, where you're talking about music. Oakland is known for the arts. We're also known for our advocacy and social justice. But right around the time of the 90s, similar to other, we know, port cities and what was happening in New York City with the ushering in of crack cocaine. And we know that was intentional. In addition to that, we saw a rise in human trafficking and other ills of society. I'm just curious, what did you observe when you arrived to Oakland that inspired you to roll up your sleeves and say, you know what, I want to make a change in this community?
Well, you know, that's a really, really interesting question. You know, the one thing I will say, because sometimes it's what I don't like that motivates me. And I did not, and still to this moment, I just actually had an incident today where it happened today. I don't like the stigmatisms that are being pushed on Black people. Like, for example, I was talking to a friend the other day about, you know, right now we have a big conversation going on, and since Art and I sit on the CPAB, you know, the conversations about community policing and community engagement and public safety, those are big conversations. And, you know, I've said to several people, I said, look, no one's advocating for more cops. What we're advocating for is treatment of people of color, but particularly Black people, not like criminals on sight. Because I grew up in an environment that I wasn't afraid of the police, because my father was scarier than the police, the judge, or anybody else that could get me into trouble. And I never forget, I think I might have mentioned this to Art. I remember when I was about 9 years old, my father said to me, my brothers, I have 2 elder brothers, and my sister and my younger brother, that if you ever get arrested, don't call my house and don't be bothering my wife. And I thought that was the strangest thing, because here I am at 9 going, but that's my mother. Like, what are you talking about? Well, obviously he meant the biblical sense of wife. And I'm sitting back asking my brother years later, he says, yeah, he said, Daddy knew that a phone call, if you got arrested, cost $5. That if you wanted to see Ma, she would have had to spend like $15 to go up to the jail or more. And as poor Black people, we didn't have those resources to even support this criminal system. So when I moved here, the thing I saw, which is everywhere I've seen, because I've not just lived here. I lived in New York, and I lived throughout areas of New York City and New York State, but in Black communities. Like, one of my favorite communities in the world is Paterson, New Jersey. Again, another dominantly Black place. And I sit back and I see young Black children be snuffed their opportunity before they were even of age to be able to examine what they wanted for their future. And that same beauty came, like, it's hard to contain it in Oakland. It just busts at the seams. That's why Oakland is such, even though it's only about 500,000 people, it's constantly being compared to other places that have several million people. I mean, Brooklyn has 3 million people. So what are you guys talking about? Like, we can't sit back and compare one that's, almost 50%, it's ridiculous. So you sit back and you look at Oakland and you look at the opportunities and you look at the art, you look at the creativity, but more importantly, I think the thing about Oakland that really shines through is the passion of its people for a better quality of life and their skin in the game. They're willing to do what it takes to do to see a change in optics, from the creativity, from the murals we see around the city, to just the sounds we hear in our communities. People are actually willing to do what's outside of the norms. When I grew up, the norms were, you became a public servant of some type, or you became a preacher. I got so many preachers in my family. It's like, really? Is that my option? Or you became a nurse or something like that. You could become an attorney. But I took a different path, primarily because I was raised by creative people. And those creative people, in the case of my dad, who was a Teamster, he was a truck driver, he was a union man. My mom was in the United Federation of Teachers. She was a paraprofessional first and then a teacher. And back in those days, in the advertising industry, they used real music and real musicians, right? Luther Vandross used to sing jingles in commercials. And my father was a studio musician off and on when he was home playing with his friends. And I got an internship at an ad agency because they were using live music. And so from that point, I realized these in common industries, because like I said, Carol started her agency in California, even though she's from Chicago. You could see the lineage in the commonalities and the groundwork. And when you see that, it's less unfamiliar territory. Like, you don't get too comfortable because it's not home, but at the same time, you realize the opportunities are there if you apply the work.
Thank you.
Carol, you are just as exciting talking to you on the phone for hours. And audience, this woman and I, we have talked on the phone for 2 and 3+ hours because your vast knowledge and bringing up and experience has definitely enriched me and helped me to become a better servant in the city of Oakland. Our next question to you is this. How did you get involved in our community and especially community policing?
Well, that's a pleasure. That's a pleasure question to answer. When I moved into West Oakland, my whole thing is let me walk around. And if I can't walk down the street in the community, that bothers me because I'm not afraid of Black people. I know a lot of people are afraid of us. I'm not afraid. I don't care if it's the biggest, baddest dude on the block. I grew up around those guys. They were guys that played basketball with my brothers. And the only reason why my brothers aren't those guys is because of my father. I made that pretty clear. They could never be roughnecks or anybody that had a hard time because my father would have took them out, literally. It would have been one of the Marvin Gaye situations. But anyway, I went to a community meeting. And I'll never forget, the crime indices was pretty high back at that time. It was like 2009. And I remember in the meeting, hearing about all kinds of stuff going on in the community. And one lady was saying, yeah, somebody tried to break into my house and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting back and I'm learning the community while I'm listening to people in this meeting. And I'm sitting back going, yeah, well, you know what? I know people have firearms. You know, I come from people that hunt. Like, you don't want to do this, but we need to find a better way to fix this. And I'm thinking that because I'm sitting back saying, who getting shot but our people? That's who to get shot. And I'll never forget, Art, this woman, white woman, pulled me out of the meeting because I had told them that somebody tried to come into my house at one point, but they didn't realize that I was home and the windows were blah, blah, blah. She pulled me out of the meeting and said, if they try to break in your house, just make sure they all the way in. That way you can shoot them in your house. And I was like, huh? And she literally thought that that was all right to pull me out of the meeting and try to give me the wink, wink, nod, nod way to shoot one of my own people. I had had enough because I understand the difference between desperation, poverty, and opportunity. And there's a lot of different portals that we are dealing with public safety. And sometimes they get so mashed up into one conversation that we don't recognize the humanity in the people who are our neighbors. You know, I still, no matter what your religious belief, I grew up in a Christian household, and we still have godly beliefs. Mm-hmm. And you don't just go around and target somebody. I actually had somebody, to believe it or not, that came into my bathroom. One time, a few years ago, it was very, very hot day in Oakland, one of those unusually hot days. And as you guys know, unlike New York, there's not air conditioning abound when you're in Oakland. Mm-hmm. So I left the bathroom window open, screen in the window, but fell asleep because it was hot. Mm-hmm. Well, in the middle of the night, I wake up and I hear this thump. And I was like, it kind of woke me up and shook me. But I said, okay, well, let me go to the washroom. Well, then I see the silhouette in the dark in my bathroom. And I'm like, fool, what you doing? What you doing in my house? And he made up this, I guess, cockamamie story.
Wait. I gotta say this.
Yeah.
You, woman, by yourself, middle of the night, hot day in Oakland, you look up at 2:00 in the morning, a.m., and there's a man in your bathtub. So I want an audience to get a.
Yeah. All right, you dropped out.
No.
Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you. I think he's having some technical lag, but just wanted to just to get our listeners to orient to just exactly the context as you tell the story and how basically NYC women are never scared. But keep going.
Well, let me just say this. Okay, there's a story from Langston Hughes called Thank You Man. Mm-hmm. And there's a woman named Luella Bates Washington Jones, which is the character that Langston Hughes designed. She's a full-figured Black woman, probably a nurse or somebody that's in a service industry, coming home from work. And the story basically is a short story about somebody who tries to snatch her purse. And she's one of those sisters that pulls that little fool back. And then she takes him home, feeds him lima beans and ham. I'll never forget the meal that she feeds him, because he was trying to snatch her purse to steal $10 so he can buy some blue suede shoes. And of course, the moral of the story is once she gives him the what for and the auntie speak, she gives him the $10 basically and says, like, you don't have to run around snatching people's purses. If you express what you need, sometimes you'll get what you ask for. And that story resonated with me ever since I was a child. I had a lot of people in the literal arts. Alice Childress was my brother's godmother. That she wrote Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich. And a lot of these stories, a lot of the Black art, a lot of the conversations that we have come back to life as adults. And what I found is when I asked that man, what are you doing in my house? He starts telling me, oh, they after me. And I didn't know if he was lying or telling the truth. I just know it was 3 a.m. and a stranger was sitting in my house And I was either going to have to figure out what I was going to do because I didn't know if he was going to harm me or not. Now, I also remember my dad saying, look, whenever you find yourself in danger, you have about 3 seconds to make one decision. Are you the predator or are you the prey? Always be the predator. And that mindset as a child flips the fear factor and says, hold up, you're out of order. So he's in my house. Why should I be afraid of that fool in my house? So I ended up talking to him and trying to kind of level set the environment. And he was saying, yeah, I was hanging out with my girl over on Chestnut and I had a boat because these guys were after me. Well, now then I lost respect for him. Why? Because he sat back and told me a story about him leaving a woman. So he took off, but left her. And I was like, now I have no respect for you. And you need to get out of my house. But I want to make sure you leave properly. So I had grabbed my cell phone because he didn't know if I had a gun or a knife or what have you. He didn't know if anybody else was in the house with me. I actually was able to call OPD. They showed up miraculously within 5 minutes. And they took him away to Don George for observation and treatment. But my point was, he did not have to get shot like that woman that tried to pull me out the meeting in order for me to feel safe. Safety to me is speculative. You have to look at the entire environment in order to assess what's unsafe and who's unsafe. Now, if God wants me to go out like that, I understand it. But I didn't think right that moment God wanted me to leave that way. So I also look at that and those symbolisms about how we survive, because I think it's more than just violence and other things that we find ourselves in those environments. We can participate to make our environments safer. The question becomes, who's having the conversation? Are we having it? Are we engaging in it? Or are we letting somebody else have it while we stand back and speculate what they're doing?
Dr. Ashley, because you know what, Carol, you are a dynamite guest speaker, and you got me when, audience, I have to say, if I woke up at 3 a.m. and saw, and I'm a man, and I saw a man in my house at 3 a.m, I cannot say I would do exactly what you did, but I'm glad you did, because one thing we have to stop being is afraid of our own people.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Ashley. Thank you.
And can I add something though before Dr. Ashley speaks?
Sure.
You know, the weird part is when OPD showed up at my door, I said to the officer, it was a Black female and an Asian male. I was on the other side of the door and they knocked. And since this man had said to me, he thought that maybe they were after him. I didn't really know if it was the cops, but she said my name to me. And I remember saying to her, we do not want any violence. Please do not shoot. I will open the door. We need to de-escalate this issue. I opened the door. She came in. The Asian officer was down the steps because I have a few steps in front of my home. All of a sudden, this German Shepherd walks up to my house and he stands there and he's sitting there. And the officer says to me, is that your dog? I said, no. And then the dog left. And so metaphorically, when I talked to my uncle about it, he said, that's your father. That dog was the spirit of your father, letting you know you were going to be safe because of the breed. It was a German Shepherd. I thought that was very spiritually interesting. And it was an oddity, but it was something that happened in the line of all of these other events that really kind of gave me kind of insight of a different outcome, as opposed to sitting back being afraid. And, of course, I got screens and shutters after that and never left my windows open because I know that people do desperate things. But I thought that was very fascinating.
Dr. Ashley, please.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful, powerful story. Carol, you previously served on the Public, Ethics Commission from 2014 to 2017. Can you share with us what that experience was like and what came from your participation?
Well, how I came to know the Oakland Public Ethics Commission, I was very proud of my service there because actually the government Ethics Act, GIA, was actually implemented after, that term, where we actually worked on subcommittees to try to make Oakland's transparency and ethics laws a little bit stronger, right? As we can see what would just happen at the federal level, we need strong ethics rules. Mm-hmm. I came to know them after hosting an intern that was from Westlake School, and it was a young Black female, and I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And that young lady, who is from East Oakland, her name is Jade Hebert. She is now a double degree graduate from the University of Puget Sound, and she's coming back to Oakland, I believe, to actually engage in African American studies and mental health in her community. Now, let me be clear. This young lady, the odds of her having a prison record, unwanted pregnancy, or any plethora of things that we know historically has been labeled on our community with our daughters and sons, was more prominent than her graduating with a double major and coming back to Oakland to work in her community. That's why working on the Public Ethics Commission to me was so important, because if it wasn't for the PEC, I would have never met that young lady. I was impressed with the work that they were doing in Oakland high schools, helping these kids see an alternative to what they're used to and what they're supposedly preordained to have. Mm-hmm. So it's time for us to change the preordainment here. We can have whatever we want to have. The question is, what are the paths for us to take it, and who's putting roadblocks in the way for us to be on that road?
And can I respond to that too, as an Oakland native and somebody that was privileged to grow up in Oakland schools, Oakland high schools, and go into higher education? Not only can we have what we want to have, but we also need to teach our young brothers and sisters how to celebrate when someone else gets what they want to have, and know that your time can come too. And that's something that's kind of happening, where sometimes we can have those, like that lack of resources or that scarcity mindset, that then where we see our brothers and sisters as competition or may lay down roadblocks for them. Let's celebrate those that make it out and come back and want to invest in their communities, and let's make it safe to do so. And I just think that's important as well.
Absolutely.
I'd like to piggyback off of that. And I think you ladies will know exactly what this means. We got to get rid of these PhDs, player hating degree, people in our own community. When I see a open up a business, graduate from college, do great things, I compliment them. But some of our people, and it was similar when we were back in high school. If you got A's, you were afraid to tell everyone you got an A because they'd be calling you bad names. Mm-hmm. We need to start celebrating good things instead of promoting bad things in our community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you both. I mean, if we sit back and look at some of we got a lot of troubles, even some of the people who are exalted in our community that have made great strides for us, Bill Cosby, R. Kelly. I mean, we got troubles, but we have to look at how these troubles impact our communities and not turn our back and to become, this is not the scarlet letter time of merry old England. We are Black people that have gone through so much that every now and then we're going to have somebody that falls from grace, and we have to ask ourselves, what happened here? How do we avoid these, because of course we're always, there's always to be a lot to be ashamed of, but I'm also looking at it from a perspective of what is crime? Because I'm from New York City, and I won't name names, but somebody that used to be the president, a lot of people don't see, all they see is the smash and grabs that our children might be involved in or something like that. They're not even looking at the higher level of crime. And see, that's kind of what in New York, we were taught not just about petty theft and survival. Yeah, we're talking about fraud and other things. And so we have to look at how are these people conducting our business? Because we're taxpayers, whether or not we make $100,000 a year or $10,000 a year, we're paying tax to someone. And we have to find ways in order to uplift our community and reinvest in that community. Because without that, we won't have communities that we can call ours.
Carol, I'd like to ask you, what would you like to see moving forward as a member of the Community Policing Advisory Board for this holiday season and our crime wave and in the new year, 2022?
Well, that's a really good question. We got a lot going on right now. I just happened to watch a television program. They have a new Black police female commissioner in New York. And of course, I just saw, Mayor London Breed's comments about the crime that's going on in San Francisco. I'd like to see, to be honest with you, I understand even the advocates' concerns about going back to the old ways of doing things, right? Because the whole push of all the police trying to look at reimagining and trying to find ways to reform. I'd like to take a look at our communities organically, us, not just people judging whether it's a crime or not, looking at us. Because there used to be a time where we knew who the criminal in the neighborhood was. And I don't know about you guys out in Oakland. I'm just telling you my experience from growing up in New York. We literally knew if you had somebody steal something out of your car, chances are it was this person over here. And we would talk about that stuff because my father, like I said, he was a truck driver. So my father would drive out of state. And then when you were out of state, you were home away from your kids. And he was always looking around and trying to make sure we stayed safe, even if his physical presence wasn't in the community. I think we need to get back to that a little bit, Art. I know I'm not saying like we violate people's privacy or anything like that, but I always like to tell people I'm not nosy, N-O-S-E-Y, I'm K-N-O-S-E-Y. I like to know what's going on in my community, who's here, but I also would like to see people connect with each other in ways to help each other. There used to be a place where we would have those conversations, and I don't think we're having them as much anyway. And how do we congregate? Because if we're not going to church like we used to, or if you don't have kids and you can run into other parents at school or after school events or other kinds of places, because you guys know, we've come a long way. We still have the beauty parlor and the barbershop ethic a little bit, but we used to have pool rooms. I remember my father they would find their stolen stuff in the pool room. And so even though I'm not advocating that we necessarily have game rooms again or something like that, I just would like to see us have more interaction with our community in a way that allows us to really know what's going on instead of somebody else telling us and us watching the nightly news trying to figure it out, because they still have not solved that problem. The advocates that would like to see less policing in the community, I'm with them. I told them, to me, I grew up in a community, we didn't see the police, even though there was crime going on, because we handled our business. And I remember my dad, there was a neighbor of ours who used to have a bad drinking problem, and him and his wife had split. And I'll never forget, he came back home to see his kids. Him and his wife went at it. We were children, really young at the time. And I remember my mom calling the police. And the police beat the living crap out of that man. And my father, when he came back from his business, he was mad at my mother because she called the cops. She said, you know what? They was going to beat that man. They split his head open, beating him with billy clubs. And my father said, that's your fault because you should have never called them. It's one thing for you to call somebody else. And my mom, she was kind of a fragile thing. She was like, I didn't know what to do. My father's like, yeah, well, then he arranged in the community who she should call when he was gone. So that way those men would come and handle it, as opposed to the police. Now, I'm not saying that that's the path to go, but I'm just saying that we got to look at real alternatives, because if we don't want to be treated like we live in a prison yard society, because that's in many ways, if you got people patrolling, unless it's designed in a way that you can actually trust who's patrolling, know that their ethic and their standards are not going to impact your community in a negative way, we got to have more answers than what we're dealing with. And believe me, I have police officers and law enforcement in my family. We talk about this all the time. They don't disagree. They don't want to be in a nanny state solving our problems. They would like to be able to do what is in the process of the rule of law, which is what this country is centered on, and do their jobs so that way they can have successful outcomes. I want to just add this really quick. I saw a Reverend Sharpton today talking about this. He says, we have some work to do with public safety reforms, because contrary to popular opinion, we're just now getting diverse officers in law enforcement. For a long time in New York especially, it was mostly white, Irish, or Italian officers. So now you have people of color. And Al Sharpton made a point of saying, the new mayor-elect of New York, Eric Adams, he's of that graduating class. A Black person who grew up in the ghetto, because he's from Brownsville, where I'm from. And now you want to make different strides, but we got to separate lawlessness from everything else. Because that's the problem we have right now, is lawlessness. People doing whatever they want to do without fear of consequences, I guess.
Well, Carol, we're working with about 5 minutes. So we want to, and audience, I think you can see how Carol and I got into 2, 3, 4 hours. Carol, you are a wealth of information here. So, Dr. Ashley, can you fire one of the last 2 questions we have? And we want to get Creighton Davis, who's on the line. We want to make sure, and I would like for you to stay on the line too, because I want our audience to hear about some of the wonderful, great things we are doing in our community, and specifically communities of color. Dr. Ashley, please.
Sure. So, Carol, we know that you're the Director of Talent, Diversity, and Professional Services for Carol H. Williams Advertising, the largest minority and female-owned creative communications company. And for the past 18 years, you've worked hard to support the firm's vision in identifying diverse creative talent. Can you tell us of some of the challenges and successes that you faced working to bring diversity into the creative advertising and content communications industry?
Well, I'm going to have to make this brief, because as Art knows, I can talk about Carol Williams. I'm like the Carol Williams fan club president, because for those that don't know Carol, and please go to the website, carolhwilliams.com. As Carol said once in the meeting, I know all of y'all. I'm in your cabinets. I'm in your underwear drawer. She was the first female to put a national Black commercial on the air in the 70s. Let me repeat that. First national Black commercial. Yes, sorry.
Well, wait. I have to ask this, because I am chair of economic development and growth for the NAACP from 2016 to 2018, and currently for the Oakland East Bay Democratic Club. Now, she's done all these national things, and I asked you to make it brief, but I have not seen her name on one contract here in the city of Oakland. A sister who's done government job in a multi-million-dollar business cannot get a $2 contract with the city of Oakland. Am I correct in saying that?
It shocked me. I was on a call last year or earlier this year. I think there was Councilmember Taylor and Councilmember Reed. And I know, I live in District 3, and Councilmember Fife hadn't, he'd just been elected. So she's still getting her fingers in the dirt and figuring out what's what. And so when I got invited to this call, I saw Paul Cobb, from the Oakland Post on the phone. But I remember saying to Ms. Williams, I said, I'm getting ready to be on this call. What do you think about this, since you've been in Oakland for 36 years? She said, tell them I've never had a contract in Oakland. And I was like, wait a minute. I thought, and being in her fan club, I followed her career for years. I said, I thought you had done, the Oakland airport work, which basically was a strategy to keep people fly from Oakland, not just from San Francisco. She was one of the people that created that. Carol's like, yeah, but that's the port. That's not Oakland. That's not the city. And then I said, wait a minute, East Bay Mud, no, that's the Water Municipal District, East Bay Mud, when we did Waterman. She said, no, I'm talking about the city. I'm like, hold up. And when that conversation happened, you guys have to really feel the impact of this. We did the 2020 census, the hard to reach, hard to count community. And let me be clear, the homeless aren't as hard to count because remember, we've got a lot of great advocacy helping at the county and the city level and the nonprofit level, making sure we count our homeless and get them the services that they need. And I'm sitting there going, wait a second. So you've done business with the Pentagon. You've done business with the United States Department of Commerce. You and Congresswoman Barbara Lee have worked hard to help make sure that if you guys go to the website, you'll see the work that we did with the East Bay Community Foundation and Kaiser Permanente on the COVID protocol work with Dr. Richard Sherman of Kaiser. And I'm like, and you've never had a city so sometimes we have to take a step back and realize these people, what are they doing? Are they just doing it to make money, or are they really trying to work in this community? We really need to start following this money and asking questions and being more, like I said, KNOSEY, nosy.
Let me get the last question up before we do a sponsorship break and get Mr. Creighton Davis on the line. Carol, you also serve as an advisory member for the Crucible, the industrial arts creator and maker space and training facility for entrepreneurs and makers of all things in industrial arts. Can you enlighten our audience briefly as to what the Crucible is? Thank you.
Well, let me just say this, and I got to give a shout out to Susan Murnett, who is somebody who I admire for many, many years. She worked with Hack to Hood, and people that actually come back to the community and do things and make things happen for our community is really important. I got interested in the Crucible because of the entrepreneurial ability that they've been able to inspire using industrial arts, training people how not to be afraid of using tools, whether it's woodworking, metalworking, glass work. They are a treasure and a gem right down by the West Oakland BART. And I encourage people to call them or go to their website to ask to take a taster's class. They have all kinds of scholarships and abilities to teach people. But I think when I was asked to be on the advisory board, my first thought was, you know what, this is a wonderful space. And they don't have this in New York. There is no Crucible in New York. It's Oakland. It's West Oakland. And they really can give people who have an interest, not just in the arts, because remember, they're in an industrial arts space. You can take those skills and training and use them to do anything from making jewelry, which they have those classes there, and you can sell. And they also have, where you can actually buy some of the made products there. They really are an incredible organization that is underutilized, especially by our people, especially by Black people. But I did say, and I'll wrap up by saying this, I remember somebody said something to me about I said, well, aren't y'all doing like Game of Thrones classes? Like everybody's watching Game of Thrones. You can come here and learn how to make something that you see on Game of Thrones. I just thought it was a unique and inspiring creative space that is not utilized enough, especially by people of color, but particularly African Americans, and learning how to do more. And it's just basically, it's the sky's the limit. You can come in there and learn how to make things and find out your own creativity. It's just a beautiful experience.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Dr. Ashley, can you take us to our sponsorship break? And we want to get back so we can get Mr. Creighton Davis on. Second thing is, I want to say that our own Congresswoman Barbara Lee uses the service of Carol H. Williams, but the city of Oakland refuses refuses to provide services to this homegrown business. I just had to put that out there, audience. Dr. Ashley, please take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Donnie Glover of BlackUSA.News, for your wonderful platform. Want to invite our listeners to tune in to Sister Biz with Nicole and Tamara on Wednesdays, and also Black USA Crypto News with Kamal Hubbard on Fridays. Learn more about Tammy Willis, owner of Magnolia Engineering and Construction, by visiting the website www.magnoliaengineeringandconstruction.com. Also, if you are interested in joining our advertisement family, please send your contact information in addition to information about your company to our email address, bbrt2021@hotmail.com. Back to you, Doug.
Dr. Ashley, when you do anything, it relaxes me on everything. And I have my stick here at hand because of you. I keep it, my stress stick right here. Thank you, Dr. Ashley, and we appreciate what you bring to the show. Audience, let's welcome back Creighton Davis Esquire, whom was a guest on Black Business Roundtable on August 26, 2021. Chair of Oakland's Community Policing Advisory Board. Dr. Ashley, can you read Mr. Creighton's bio? Because only you can do it like no.
That's because I'm a product of an Oakland Public School teacher. But Mr. Creighton Davis was born in San Francisco, California, and now lives on the better side of the bay, just joking with you, in Oakland.
That's right.
After graduating from high school, he attended Boston College. And while there, he was a member of the Division I swim team. He also pursued part of his education at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London and the American University in Cairo. After college, Creighton was a middle school teacher in the South Bronx and then went on to New York University School of Law. Welcome back, Creighton. We're happy to have you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me again. And I am just, I was taking notes when Carol was speaking because, she's just such a wealth of knowledge, number one. And number two, I'm glad that she's still on the line, because if you had me follow up her without her on the line, I would have been real upset. So I'm glad that she's here, and I'm really grateful to be able to share this space with you guys again. It's good to be back. Oh.
My chairperson for the Community Policing Advisory Board, my brother, and now my friend. I appreciate you coming back on the show and talk about some of the outstanding work that you are doing in the city of Oakland, who is being plagued with gun violence, burglary, crime, racial issues, lack of police services in certain communities. And I would like to say thank you for coming back on the show. Some updates since your last visit back in August. You currently serve as chair of Oakland's Community Police Advisory Board, as we know. As a refresher for our audience, the board has historically served as advisors to the chief of police, the police department, and the city on community matters. What has been happening since we last talked in August in regards to the Community Police Advisory Board? And audience, I want you to sit down, grab some popcorn real quick, and a nice glass of wine. Chairperson Creighton Davis, you lit up City Council with your presentation in a clear and defined plan to move this city forward and reduce crime and increase the quality of life for the people who live here in Oakland. Sir, I'm going to put it on mute. And between you and Creighton, Dr. Ashley, we could just kind of sit back and watch, because these two people are going to light it up. Thank you.
Well, you know, speaking of the plan, it's basically exactly what Carol said. It's building relationships with community members and creating institutions in the community other than the police. So what Carol had said was, you know, over the past several decades, we've seen institutions leave the community. So that means community centers, that means churches, that means wealth, that means home ownership. So what's left? The only institution that's left is law enforcement. And when you only have law enforcement as the institution, then you only have one response to a host of different issues. And that one response isn't the appropriate response for all those issues. And what we're focusing on this board is building relationships, which we call community engagement. And I'll tell you a little story about how I think about that in a second. And then the second part is neighborhood empowerment. That means equipping neighbors with the skills so that they don't have to call 911 for everything, and that they know when is appropriate to call 911 and when is not. But when I think about community engagement and building relationships, I kind of think about the stories that my dad told me growing up. He grew up in Dallas, Texas, and he was born in 1949 and grew up in that era of still deep segregation. And he grew up in an all-Black community. But in that all-Black community were his grandparents, his aunts, his uncles, his parents' friends. So anytime he walked down the block, he knew somebody. And somebody knew him. They said, "Oh, that's Little Ricky. Little Ricky, where you going? Where you going, Ricky?" And that type of relationship of knowing who your neighbors are, knowing who lives on your block, and being friendly with them, knowing what their backgrounds are, connecting, actually makes us safer. Because when somebody's blasting music at 3 a.m., 3 houses down, and you walk over and you knock on the door and you say, "Hey, can you turn that down?" That interaction isn't the first interaction that you've had with that individual. That's the 100th interaction. So then that person, when he sees you, is able to say, "Oh, I know that, you have a grandmother at home and she's probably trying to get to sleep, or you have, a young child." And that person is more likely, not guaranteed, but more likely to adjust the behavior. And when we're not adjusting behavior, then what can the community do to resolve that issue before we actually call 911? And that's where the empowerment comes in, because how do we empower community members to resolve disputes and mediate conflicts? And what kind of skills can we empower community members to do that with?
Carol, work with us here, because we have some questions we want to get off the table before we doing a group conversation. But I thought it was critical, Dr. Ashley. 2 things. Can you give our audience the psychological effect that our neighborhoods are having from back in 1960s and 70s to where, and you, Dr. Ashley and Carol, you ladies are too young to understand that. I know you guys are in your tweens. But can you explain to our audience, Dr. Ashley, the psychological effect that it has on young Black boys and girls, to where when they see Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Jones, where my mama told Mrs. Smith, "If you see that boy doing something, I want you to take a switch and beat him to death and have a fresh switch waiting for me when I get home, because I'm going to give him a second beating." Can you explain to our audience how that lack of engagement and interaction with community policing has destroyed our communities, our Black communities, and has left our young people feeling that, hey, we can run wild out here. My mama don't know these white people down the street or these Asian people down here. And there's nothing against white people, Asian people, and Hispanic people, but they don't parent like Black parents do. Thank you, Dr. Ashley.
Sure. I think as an 80s baby, it's interesting being raised by parents that, my father's family being one of the first to integrate the Crocker Highlands area. When we talk about I think when there was migration, there's a sense of community loss. Now, when my father's family was helping to integrate the Crocker Highlands area, they brought people with them. But there's this idea, there's been the dismantling of the Black community, the dismantling of the Black family. And when we talk about that, where there isn't that same type of fear, for instance, at church or whatnot, where there could be correction. And there was this idea of the village supporting the development of children. Anyone could correct you. And the worst thing, as you mentioned, that you didn't want is that your parents to hear about your misbehavior, or, your friends' parents to hear about the misbehavior. But they're different. I can say there's a different code now. One of the things that I'm noticing about just being in neighborhoods, and I'm not scared of my people either, but what I do recognize as a clinical psychologist is when people don't have empathy. And that's what's missing in our community. Somewhere along the line, we lost the idea of empathy and respect for elders. There's no code. Whereas before, where we used to know who that person was, as you mentioned, Carol, who was stealing, who that person, at this point, anyone can get it. And that's what's scary, is that our grandmothers, our grandfathers, the kind of conversations we're having. So I think we've become more individualistic, and we've lost that sense of safety and being able to just see that a communal aspect of one another. I think just to point to a couple things, substance use is one of the quickest ways to devalue a human being. When another thing that's happened in our community, human trafficking, where we're okay with still, since I've been growing up, the idea of young women and young boys as well, up and down East 14th being cautomized. So we have some things inside the community where you can't worry about what's outside the ship if you let the water in.
Right.
And I think, so there is an opportunity to reestablish a sense of community, but that has to be done with trust. And there's the trust within group that we need to strengthen and work on. And then we can work on the trust across groups.
Thank you, Dr.
If I could
Ad.
just follow on to that really quickly. One phrase that always comes to mind is hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
And there's a lot of pain in our community right now.
Yes.
There's a lot of pain from negative interactions and painful interactions with law enforcement. There's a lot of pain from the economic disinvestment from the system that we live in. There's a lot of pain from one another and the stress that, we're under, and how that boils up into altercations. And we have to address that pain and not brush it under the rug through incarceration. So that's something I just wanted to add. And I think that, what we're trying to do on the CPAB is kind of a long-term mission of building an institution in our community. But we're making quick steps right away. And Doug, Carol, you guys have both been the leaders of making those steps. Doug, with that neighborhood pop-up that we did, you organized a neighborhood pop-up where you connected with basically the mayor of the block in Toller Heights. And he brought a whole bunch of folks together, about 30, 40 folks in his driveway to connect. And then Chief Armstrong came through and spoke to those individuals and was held to account. He answered their questions. He responded to their comments. They had a better understanding of what his job is like and what constraints he's under. But even more important, they are now better able to advocate for what their needs are because they had that experience. And that's just the first of many. As you say, block by block, Doug, block by block.
Well, I want to thank you for that. And I really want to thank Chief Armstrong, who has less than a year on the job, an African-American Black man police chief for the city of Oakland. People are talking about getting rid of him now. And I know Carol and Creighton, you guys are hearing that. I want to be perfectly and emphatically clear before we move forward with your next question, Dr. Ashley. We are not going to let you run Chief Armstrong out here quietly into the night. So if you are listening to this, those of you who want to get some Rough Rider sheriff in this city to clean up. Chief Armstrong has some great ideas on what to do, and we refuse to allow you to run him off before he's able to implement these problem-solving community policing projects and programs that he has on the table. Dr. Ashley, please ask the next question. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the idea surrounding community healing with regard to the Community Policing Advisory Board. This idea of bringing community with just sounds very exciting. So just want to see if you could share some more insights into that.
Yeah, that's I'm so glad you picked up on that and you're asking that question. So one thing that we are going to do over the next year is conduct community trainings. And one of those trainings will be trauma-informed healing circles and figuring out how to actually bring folks together and address trauma, resolve trauma, but also hold one another's trauma and be spaces where we can support one another. And there's some amazing organizations in Oakland, community organizations that specialize in that work that we want to partner with to lead that training. But I want to add that, the work that we've done this year as a board, we've lobbied for $50,000 in funds from the city of Oakland for this training. And I got to thank Carol Wyatt and Art Douglas Blacksher for that, because we got in front of the representatives and we got in front of anybody who would hear us, and we got that money, and now we can deploy it not to some far off community, but in our own communities and in a way that helps our own communities. So that those healing circles are one step. Another step is like the conflict mediation, dispute resolution. Another step is how to be a diverse and inclusive leader in your neighborhood council and on your block. But I'm all ears in terms of other best practices that we should think about and how we can better create those healing circles, because I think it's so important, because the burdens that we bear, again, hurt people. Those burdens that we bear just get heavier and heavier and heavier. And then that just creates somebody lashing out.
Mm-hmm. That's exciting. Just to piggyback, that's really exciting, especially given the rates we see of PTSD in the inner city. Right now, the DSM-5 defines post-traumatic stress disorder looking at one event or vicarious trauma of witnessing someone's threat of loss of life. But we're also looking at lobbying for a diagnosis called complex trauma. And that's not to label individuals, but to, when we have an opportunity to talk about incidences that we're seeing, then we can allocate resources as such. And so they've looked at youth in, Oakland, youth in South Los Angeles and other places where we're looking at the aspects and the impact of complex trauma on our children, and then also on the resilience of our adults. So that's really exciting to hear.
Yeah, and again, just to kind of follow up on what you just said, I mean, the trauma that results from gun violence is almost impossible to quantify. There are studies that show that a kid who is proximate to gun violence or has witnessed somebody get shot or killed loses 2 years of academic learning after that event, because their brain shuts off, because they are trying to deal with the horror of what they just saw. Just a couple weeks ago, I was sitting at Lake Merritt reading a book. Beautiful Sunday afternoon, light shining, and I hear a pop. Mm-hmm. I turn around and I see somebody stumble to the floor about 100 yards down. A man was shot interrupting a burglary of his own car. His name was Eric Davis, which happens to be my father's name. And I saw how, law enforcement was close by. I saw how all the other folks that were vending at the market were close by. Those people are affected by that. But what about Eric's mother? What about Eric's cousins? What about his friends who are right there? Like that event happened just like that, but that ripple effect extends. And we not only have to honor his life and say, yes, this happened and he was loved and he was an amazing human being. But we also have to care for those who are touched by that ripple effect and make sure that they are held and cared for within our community.
Can I also just say something to piggyback off of that? Just like the hypervigilance of you sitting at the lake and this idea that over time, just the looking behind, looking around, what it feels like, the aftermath of trauma. And we see this often in our children that are hyperactive and their labels assigned, but this idea of having your head on a swivel, many people are starting to respond in those ways. That's a natural healing response to trauma. So I know we're going to talk and ask more questions about what's happening in the city and cars being left open. But I have to just, again, highlight people leaving their trunks open. Coping is the selection of what is the best scenario or what you have best available. And so people aren't trying to open themselves up to, for instance, identity theft or whatnot. But when you see people bipping or breaking windows in broad daylight, people are like, what? When anybody copes, they're like, how can I solve this problem with the resources I have? We're seeing desperate solutions. Mm-hmm. But we have to be mindful that this is people trying their best to cope with whatever is being presented. So in psychology, we like to say we don't take away one coping skill without offering another. And even if it's a healthier or an alternative, we want to highlight people's coping, like the stick, highlight how people are coping the best way they can. Sometimes it's hour to hour, day by day. Sometimes it's moment to moment.
Well, I think we need to have Dr. Ashley as in one of our trainings, because clearly she has a wealth of knowledge that needs to be inserted into our community. So hopefully we can bring you in, Dr. Ashley.
I'm game.
Well, Creighton, Dr. Ashley, and Carol, I want to say, Dr. Ashley, you make this show. And the reason why you make this show is because we all know what the problems are in our community. But we all aren't willing to deal with the psychological harm, the lifelong psychological harm, not only to our children who aren't able to craft a reasoning to why these are happening, but to help them through a thought process, understand and grow healthy and move forward mentally. So, Dr. Ashley, I want to thank you again, and this show would not be the show without your perspective.
Wow, thank you, Doug.
Carol, I also want to say thank you for being patient while we drill our brother Creighton David. Creighton, what is your take on members of the community resorting to a rash of break-ins and leaving their car trunks open to deter property damage as depicted on the news this week? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of what Dr. Ashley had said on the other side of this, on the other side of the coin, the coping. Coping with this environment of constant threat and constant fear, and trying to avoid that at all costs by doing extreme measures. But if you can understand why somebody would leave, a trunk open, or like I do, I leave my windows down actually. And I've been doing that for a while because I'd rather somebody look into my car and see that I don't have anything in there than break my window and see that I don't have anything in there. I've been doing that. But the same reason why I do that and why you can understand I would cope in that way, we have to have the empathy to understand why somebody might break into the window in the first place. And that's difficult. That takes a lot. But if we understand what would push somebody to break a window and get maybe $25 of items, $50, you're not getting much, rarely. Then we understand what kind of economic anxiety, what personal anxiety, what community anxiety that individual is living under. And then we have to figure out, how do we address that? Now, I'm not saying that we should completely get rid of, arrests and law enforcement, but how do we do it in a way where, we're treating the individual? You can detain somebody and treat that person. You can detain somebody and give that person opportunities, give that person a pathway outside of his his or her, previous record or previous experience. So we got to rethink the entire way we're both policing, we're building our community, but also, as somebody had said earlier, how we're treating one another and the empathy that we have. When I was a teacher, I taught in the South Bronx Middle School social studies, and it was a school that was all Black and Latino in the South Bronx. And there were some teachers there who, I wasn't from the South Bronx, but there were teachers there that were white and also not from the South Bronx. And they would get so upset at the kids, and there would be some distance. And I didn't have that, because the kids, I saw me in them. That was me. The kid that was talking a lot and joking in the classroom, that was me. The kid that was quiet and kind of shy and afraid to make a fool of himself, that was me. The kid that was also gangbanging in the corner, I can imagine myself doing that, because those elements, if I was in his position, would have been attracted to me had I grown up in that environment. So then I'm treating the individual differently, because there's no distance, there's no superiority about like, oh, I'm better, or this person is lower than me. No, we're the same. We just have to figure out how we can uplift each other at the same time.
Dr. Ashley?
Am I up next? Okay. So what are some of the, I would say, suggestions from the community to kind of put an end to some of the crime sprees we're seeing, or the flash mobs, as we get closer to Christmas? I know that's a loaded one. I know.
Yeah, I maybe Carol has an answer to this. This is I might punt on this one. That's a tough one. I mean, it's some of that is organized crime and taking advantage of, and we don't know where those elements are coming from. Some of those elements may be trying to destabilize, some of the good work that Chief Armstrong is doing, and some of the good work that's going on in the Bay Area. Those could be organized elements that, just are targeting the reality that there aren't as many cops in Oakland as you might see in other cities. So that is a tough question that I don't know if I have an answer to.
Creighton, I'm glad Carol stayed on the line, and we.
No, I was just scratching my ear. You were good, Doug. You were good.
Oh, you can hear me, girl. You got me.
Yeah.
I want Carol and I to both chime in on that. And what I mean with the flash mobs and all this stuff going on, I had the opportunity to attend a 100 Black Men Scholarship Gala event in San Francisco last Saturday night. And I had a chance to talk with Chief Armstrong briefly. And I told Chief Armstrong, Creighton, Carol, I want you to hear this. So when you see the Chief, you can let him know. I told Chief, you are not going to quit. And we are not going to let them run you out of here until you get the job done. I let him know that the Community Policing Advisory Board has got him 100%. So can you help us, Carol, answer that question that was just posed by Dr. Ashley? Thank you.
Well, it is an interesting question, because as I pointed out, in this community, especially in West Oakland, we've seen people, gentrified out. I remember across the street, there was a young man who, every now and then we get into it, because he was formerly incarcerated and he came back to the community, like he was king of the block, and the block had changed. And even he then realized that the block had changed. So he kind of altered his behavior. But, I still am of the belief that a lot of the opportunity is like Creighton said, it is organized. It may not be mafioso type organized crime. A lot of times people hear organized crime, they don't really realize what that really means. And that, it's something that's it's crime of opportunity. We used to hear about, a couple of years back, people getting their cell phones snatched or their electronic devices snatched. And, we had a great conversation with our neighborhood right now. Actually, he's actually our community captain, Bobby Hookfin. And they would tell us, how these electronics are captured, how they're sold outside the United States. I happen to know that for a fact, because I have friends that are all over the country, all over the world. And you would hear about it, like even friends that would come here and want to tell me, where can I buy an iPhone that's unlocked? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And they would tell me sometimes the stolen merch that we had somebody get robbed in our community ends up in Brazil. So, that's a good question. It's very difficult, but I think at the end of the day, it still does come down to what is going on in our community and what are we doing? What are we watching? I think that there's an element in some ways that we're not engaged enough to know what's going on in our community. Like we tend to engage, there's a place over by me, Willie Keys Recreation Center, and they have a computer lab and stuff like that. And we tend to engage when it comes to our children. We need to engage when it comes to us. And we tend to engage when it comes to our seniors. We need to engage when it comes to us. A lot of people think I have a lot of knowledge. I don't just have a knowledge about Oakland. There's a 94-year-old man named Walter that lives at Sylvester Rutledge Senior Home. He's the one who told me about Oakland. 94 years old. Mm-hmm. And I sat with him one night a few years ago on National Night Out, and he was outside. He was so happy to listen to the Whispers and listen to the old bands that he grew up listening to. He was a native of Oakland. And he was telling me some of this foolishness, obviously the crack era and all the other, stuff that has been, imposed upon our communities. Some of those, tests that have been put to the test in our community to try to destroy our community, that shows how resilient Black people really are, because they haven't taken us out yet. They're not going to take us out, even those who are in situations of dire straits. So I wish I had more information on it. I tend to want to look more at the data of who are these people and what brought them here. Now, obviously, there's people that are in the gang violence and into the, the underground market and stuff. Yeah, of course, they're coming into Oakland and they're imposing on us. But at the same time, are they related to these people? Maybe not. I've come to know that a lot of the people in the, like we would see when the activity was going on, and we would notice there was a park here on San Pablo Avenue called St. Andrews Plaza, which is now gated up, which we had actually employed the city to do because we were concerned about the activities that used to go on there. There was a lot of death coming out of that park, and there was people that weren't from Oakland. We noticed that all of a sudden at 2:00 in the morning, that park would be pitch black and nobody was in there. And I was like, that's kind of ironic. Why wouldn't they be out there at night? If they're out there dealing during the day, why wouldn't they be out there dealing at night? My parents used to call it Saturday night, Sunday morning, right? Saturday night music versus Sunday morning music. And we used to notice that Sunday morning, them folks wasn't out there. And we just deduced that they weren't from Oakland. And they weren't.
Carol, let me say this, because we have a few more questions and we're going to wrap it up in some good open discussion. Chief Armstrong and city council members. One thing I'm finding out is that I don't know if it's the powers that be, the Darth Vader, or just bad people. They're trying to pit the Chief Armstrong with our progressive city council members to where they're having them at odds instead of having them work together. Yep. I want to put this out there to the audience, specifically those who live here in Oakland. We need to figure out how Chief Armstrong and our progressive city council people get together and find solutions instead of having problems. Because I myself are finding out that there are people who want the city council to be mad at the chief and the chief to be mad at the city council. And they're talking about two apples to oranges, oranges to apples, instead of apples to apples, oranges to oranges. So to that end,
if I could speak to that really quickly, Doug, I think we in our society have gotten into a point where we are on one team or the other. We end up choosing absolutes. More police, more community. Can't do both. You got to choose one. And really the answer is we got to do a both and. We got to, make sure that we have enough officers that are constitutionally policing and responding to people's issues and doing it in a way where it's just and we're not harming people. Because Oakland has right now only 650 officers, and normally it's supposed to have 750 or 800, and some people would argue more. And folks aren't getting the response they need. But we also have to invest in our community. We have to make sure that we build institutions like the community centers, like the stuff that we're doing at the neighborhood council level, that counterbalances the institution of law enforcement, so that it's not the only show in town. We got to invest in our community as well, and it doesn't have to be like choose one or the other. And people have to understand that that investment in the community isn't something that is going to yield results just like that. That takes time, because we've invested in law enforcement for past, centuries, but at least to a high level the past couple decades. So they've got such a head start in terms of being an institution that we're starting at the ground floor with the community investment. So it's going to have to take time and time and time as it meets up. But at the end of the day, the community response will eventually outweigh the law enforcement response if we let it and invest in it enough.
And I would like to say this: we're wrapping up with less than 10 minutes. Chair Creighton Davis, how can adults in our community get involved with our Community Policing Advisory Board and make a difference? Thank you, sir.
That's a great question, and it's an important question. So number one, it's to be tapped in, just like Carol Wyatt and Doug Blacksher are into their communities. They have their ears to the streets, their pulse on the ground, and they know what's happening, and they're trusted. And that is so important, because they can then be advocates, and they know, who to contact and who to reach out to. So that's my first step, to get involved in the community and understand what's going on. Number two, we are looking for board members. We have some vacancies. So if you have those, qualifications in that background where you're involved and you care and you want to make a difference, then we need board members. So definitely want to invite listeners who are tapped in to apply and to join our board. Third is to come to our meetings and advocate for the issues that you care about, because our platform, our space, in that space, we have the city administration, we have OPD, we're going to get OFD, the fire department, and macro in that space as well. So we will have all the major stakeholders, so that if something is stuck in your neighborhood and not working, maybe you're having too many sideshows, maybe you have an issue with code enforcement, and you're getting stuck in the process. We know that, unfortunately, the loudest voice in the room is the one that gets heard. And oftentimes in Oakland, those loudest voices are those that live in Montclair and in the Hills and in Rockridge. So then how do we get representation in East Oakland, in West Oakland, in the Fruitvale? And that means that we have to be that space for people. So I think those are the ways that I would recommend getting involved. And it's service at the end of the day. It's caring for your community and caring for the people around you.
Dr. Ashley?
Oh, do I have the pleasure of asking?
Yeah, we got 2 more questions left, and then we want to close it out. But I want to make sure our audience get the full impact on these 2 dynamite guest speakers that we have on here today. Dr. Ashley?
Sure. So Doug asked about how adults can get involved. What about our youth? Because I know that we have leadership that can start early. How can our youth get involved and support community growth and advocacy?
So, I feel like you're asking the perfect questions, and it reminds me that, we're going on the right track. So we have a plan right now where we have Berkeley law students working with neighborhood councils to partner with Oakland schools to develop projects in the neighborhood. So we've identified 4 sites so far, or 4 neighborhood councils that have a relationship with the schools in their areas. And we're going to connect the neighborhood council leaders and the community members with the schools and with the kids in their schools so that they can work on projects together, so that the kids can, number one, see that their environments are not static, that they can be changed, that what they see doesn't necessarily mean that's what they get. They can change that. And number 2, that means that later on, they'll be the ones that are leading. They'll be the ones that are running for office. They'll be the ones that, are the business owners, because they'll see that, okay, this is my community, and the way it looks right now, I could be the person that's selling, clothes in the store on the corner, or having a business like in engineering down the street. So that's what we're thinking, and we hope to get that launched in 2022, and we've already taken steps to do that. So.
Can I just jump in and just say and put my professor hat on for a second and talk about project-based learning and how that's really setting up our youth to be employable, and these skills that certain schools don't always look at when we're looking at what type of teaching pedagogy we're using. So project-based learning, kudos to you and the other organizers and developers, because that's where industry is going. So that's great to hear.
Awesome.
As we get the last question in, Creighton, close to your heart is your continued passion for education through your work on the board of Aram Preparatory, a middle school in East Oakland, and Center of Youth Development through Law, an organization that promotes educational achievement and legal knowledge through a summer legal curriculum and summer internships. We always want to give our guests the opportunity to share updates. So how can we help our dollars, especially during this time of the year, to support your efforts?
Oh yeah, thank you so much for giving space to these 2 great organizations and raising them up. Orem Prep, I actually have our board call in 3 minutes, and we know that school is in East Oakland, and they're doing great work. They're doing project-based learning, but more importantly, their kids are succeeding in the classroom. They're coming in a year and a half, 2 years behind. We're talking about majority of Black and brown kids in East Oakland, and they are catching up, and they're graduating caught up and ahead. So I can't shout out the work that that school is doing enough, led by a Black executive director, a large number of Black and brown folk on the faculty, which we know has a huge impact in how kids learn and what kids can imagine for themselves. So you can donate to Orem Prep, as well as the Center for Youth Development through Law, which is another organization where we've hosted 2 interns. And both Carol and Doug have been able to meet them. And our intern last summer took them on a little ride around to the different national night out events, and his mind was just going, and the brilliance of that mind, where he's saying, okay, well, what about we do this? What about we do that? And these are ideas that, I hadn't thought of, and he's coming up with them. So that's another program where, provides internship and provides experience, and you can donate to both just by following those links. And it would go a long way to supporting kids in our community that look like us.
Creighton and Dr. Ashley and Carol Wyatt. Creighton, I know you have to go in less than 2 minutes, so I know you're going to fade off for your next meeting. We're going to go just a few minutes overboard, because let me tell you, audience, if you did not know what to do in your community, whether it be policing, improving the quality of policing, getting involved with community policing, or helping out you to be better people, this show taught you today. Creighton, it was a pleasure and an honor having you on here today. And I know you gotta go. We look forward to having you back. Carol, if you can hang on a minute, Dr. Ashley, you can hang on a minute, and then we'll wrap it up with our sponsors. Yeah. Thank you again, Creighton.
No, thank you, Doug. It's always a pleasure. And when you said friend, that's right back at you. I appreciate you, and you are such a good person. And anytime you call, it brings a light to my face. And Dr. Ashley, always a pleasure to see you. And now I'm glad we're now connected properly. And Carol, words can't describe the impact and the fight that you have for the community. And I also consider you a friend and appreciate you very much.
I feel the same way, Creighton. And I'm a New Yorker now. We should ride. It's ride or die.
It's ride or die. That's right.
Ride or die.
That's right. All right. Good night, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Carol, and
Yes,
like I said, we're at 6:00, but we're going to go a few minutes over because I don't know about you, Dr. Ashley, but I'm ready to take a bullhorn and drive up and down my neighborhood, my community, and start getting people to join, whether it be getting them involved with voting, getting them involved with youth community projects to help develop these young people, whether it helps getting involved with understanding who our representatives are, like Barbara Lee, Congresswoman, the beacon of light, not only Oakland and Alameda County, but California and the nation. Barbara Lee.
Globally.
Carol,
Globally. Barbara Lee is a force. She is globally known. And that's a big deal. That's a huge deal. They've got a lot of people in Congress, over 400 Congress people. Barbara's name is globally recognized. And that should give us pause because she's Oakland's girl. She's our representative.
Carol, since we're going over, can you briefly explain how you met Barbara Lee? And then I'm gonna close this out. But I think it's so important that the audience look at this stage and go, those people look like us.
Yep. Cool. Well, I know Congresswoman Lee because she's very dear friends with my boss, with Carol. And the interesting part, I don't want to get into how they met each other, but the interesting part is the synergy of people. You notice how all these great Black people know other great Black people. That's a big deal. When I just read the other day that Samuel Jackson and his wife, LaTanya, gave Spelman, I think that was her alma mater, right? Because he went to Morehouse, $5 million. The message wasn't just about the money. It was about the investment of what that university did for her and the people who have come out of that university. And that's why HBCUs are so important. Like, we're looking at all of these things, but we're so disconnected. And could you imagine if we connect all those dots, what is about to happen? Like, it's the same groundswell when Obama ran. A lot of people, even if you didn't like Obama, and I know some people that didn't, they voted for him anyway. They were like, okay, I've got to vote for the brother. Because it was almost, even if you didn't agree with his politics, because I know a lot of Black conservatives. Don't forget, a lot of people down south, they're conservative. I'm the church-going people. They don't, and even here, I know Black Republicans that live in the Oakland Hills, but they're not rich people. They just have those values that used to belong to the Republican Party in some ways. And I'm sitting back and I'm going, yeah, but could you imagine if all of us, because we agree on mostly the same things. Public safety isn't just for the rich white hills. We want it here in the hood. We want it in West Oakland. And we want to be able not to blame somebody's child or somebody's relative that's going through. We just have to look at what is bringing this about? What is bringing this on? And it really, it takes a village. It takes all of us. Because unfortunately, one of the things I say commonly is this is not a concierge city. If you want to see something done, you got to get in the game. You can't sit back and say, how come the council's not doing this? Or how come the mayor's not doing? No, you need to go and ask them to their face. I've asked the mayor myself to her face. Why is this not this way? And we have a lot more work to do because there's always kind of those forces, because this is capitalism after all. And we have to recognize economic forces are driven by certain things. So that's why I'm proud of the work you guys are doing. You're complimenting us, but let me compliment you guys. The economic outreach and the importance of conversations like the ones you guys inspire and are having, not just talking about, but actually bringing people to the table that can have these conversations. Because even if I work for who I work for, who does magnificent work, I mean, I kind of didn't answer the question earlier because I kind of skipped over, but you know, Carol has brought more people of color, Black people, into the advertising world than any other firm, any other. I've worked for her for almost 20 years. And I've sat back and go, I'll be damned. We've hired over 3,000 Black people in this amount of time. Like, I'll sit back and it shocks me. And a lot of them didn't know, like, they didn't necessarily go to school to be in media communications or social media and digital. You know, we work with a lot of entities around the city, like, you know, Sean Ty's Bridgegood, you know, which is down by, you know, Jack London Square. We work with a lot of these people that are, or Youth Radio, that's on 17th and Broadway. We've worked with a lot of these people because our children are really talented. Advertising and marketing and media comms, they didn't necessarily know that that was an option for them. Somebody asked me, I remember I met a rich white man up at a winery, and he was sitting back making poo-poo faces about his daughter who had been studying graphic arts and design. And I said to him, you know something? This is back around maybe 2012. I said, you shouldn't poo-poo your daughter's choices. I said, because those are the kids who kept working after the economic meltdown of 2008, when GM and corporations like that went bankrupt, right? The car industry went bankrupt, or at least GM did. And your daughter and friends and people with those graphic and those creative designs, they went to work for a company called Pixar Animation Studios, which of course was bought by Disney. So the entertainment world that we know today, which is Netflix and Disney Plus and Apple TV and this, that was being incubated while the other economy was falling apart.
Carol, we really appreciate you. We are way over the mark. Dr. Ashley, Carol, Wyatt, our audience, thank you for tuning in. And remember, together, we can listen, we can learn, and share, because I know you care. This is Doug Blacksher of the Black Business Roundtable. God bless and good night. Thank you.
Happy holidays, you guys.
Same to you.